Thank all the people for all their letters. And, I want to explain something to all the people out there, all my friends, because you're all right behind me, I know it. I'm not here because of them taking the belt away from me. There's another reason. I'm here because they wanted me to lower my standards. I set my standards high. That was one of my goals 3 years ago, to be a perfect example. And nobody's going to tell me to lower my standards or to do something that I can't be proud of.
Bob Backlund never lost a submission. He never got pinned. In nearly 6 years as WWF Champion, he beat legends, sold out Madison Square Garden more times than anyone could count, and represented the entire promotion the way Vince McMahon Sr. wanted it. Represented clean, credible, unbeatable, and yet his reign ended anyway. On December 26, 1983, with a white towel sailing through the ropes, thrown by his own manager, he didn't quit. He didn't tap. His own corner made that decision for E. Him, that single detail is what makes this story different from almost every other title change in wrestling history, because the real story was never actually happening inside the ring. It was happening in a boardroom where a new owner had already decided the sport needed a completely different kind of champion, and the old one simply hadn't been told yet. This is the story of how Bob Backlund's era ended, not with a loss he could live with, but with a decision made entirely without him. To understand how significant that towel throw really was, you first have to understand exactly what Bob Backlund represented, and to whom. When Backlund won the WWF Championship on February 20th, 1978, he wasn't just picking up a belt. He was inheriting the identity of the entire company. At the time, the WWF was still operating as a regional territory under Vince McMahon Sr., and the champion functioned as the face of that territory. The guy fans in the Northeast could point to and say, "This represents us." Backlund fit that role almost perfectly. He was a legitimate amateur wrestler and NCAA champion, and he carried himself less like a larger-than-life character and more like an actual elite athlete who happened to also be personable and clean-cut. He didn't have the flash of someone like superstar Billy Graham, but he had something Vince Sr.'s version of the business valued even more highly: believability. For almost 6 years, that formula worked. Backlund defended the title constantly, against a murderer's row of opponents that included Pat Patterson, Greg Valentine, and Sergeant Slaughter, and he even worked programs against outside champions at a time when cross-promotional matches were rare. He was, by every measure available at the time, the company's foundation. But while Backlund was exactly what Vince Sr. wanted, Vince McMahon Jr. was already building something else entirely. In 1982, Vince Jr. purchased the company from his father, and his ambitions looked nothing like the regional territory model that had built Backlund's entire run. Vince Jr. wasn't interested in representing one region well. He wanted a national, eventually global product. One built less around pure athletic credibility and more around spectacle, music, larger-than-life characters, and mainstream media crossover. Looking at his own champion through that lens, Backlund suddenly looked like a mismatch. He was a serious, understated technician in an industry Vince Jr. wanted to turn into something loud, colorful, and built for television in the MTV era. The company was about to change shape entirely, and Vince Jr. had already identified the man he wanted at the center of that change, a towering, charismatic performer out of Venice Beach who referred to his fans as Hulkamaniacs. Hulk Hogan and Bob Backlund were, in almost every meaningful sense, opposites. Backlund built his reputation on technical wrestling and hard-earned credibility. Hogan built his on-presence catchphrases and a direct, almost theatrical connection with the crowd. Hogan had also already picked up mainstream recognition through his appearance in Rocky III, ironically, an appearance that had gotten him let go from the company under Vince Sr., who didn't want his wrestlers moonlighting in Hollywood. Vince Jr. saw that same Hollywood exposure as exactly the kind of rocket fuel his new vision for the company needed. By late 1983, Vince Jr. had re-signed Hogan and was ready to build his entire future around him. There was just one obstacle standing in the way. Bob Backlund was still the reigning champion, and someone had to actually lose the title before Hogan could be handed it. The most straightforward solution, from a purely creative standpoint, would have been to turn Backlund into a villain and have him drop the title directly to Hogan in a program built around jealousy and generational conflict. It's easy to see the appeal the beloved former champion turning bitter and antagonistic toward the exciting new star practically writes itself as a storyline. Backlund refused. For him, the character wasn't a costume he put on and took off. It was an extension of who he actually was, built over 6 years as a role model audiences, including children, had come to trust. Turning that character into a villain felt by his own account like a betrayal of everything the role had stood for, reportedly including how his own children would see him on television. He wouldn't do it, regardless of what it meant for the company's plans. That refusal put Vince Jr. in a genuinely difficult position. He now had a champion unwilling to turn heel, and a chosen successor in Hogan, who was also established as a fan favorite, meaning a direct Backlund Hogan program, structured as hero versus villain, wasn't really available as an option, without one of them changing their entire on-screen identity. Backlund, by several accounts, also wasn't especially convinced of Hogan's in-ring credibility at the time, adding another layer of friction to an already complicated situation. But Vince Jr.'s broader plan wasn't going to bend to accommodate any of that. If Backlund wouldn't turn, the company needed an entirely different route to get the title off him. That route needed a very specific kind of performer, someone credible enough that Backlund would actually agree to lose to him, but hated enough by audiences that beating him could instantly turn whoever won the title into wrestling's biggest hero. That performer was the Iron Sheik. The Iron Sheik brought real legitimacy, a genuine amateur wrestling background, and a former AU championship pedigree, combined with a villain persona that landed with maximum impact given the political climate of the era, including the recent Iran hostage crisis, which made his anti-American character one of the most reviled in the entire industry. He was, in other words, the perfect bridge, someone Backlund could lose to without it feeling like a step down, and someone fans would be desperate to see beaten by literally anyone. With the pieces in place, WWF began laying the groundwork for the title change several weeks out. On television, the Iron Sheik attacked Backlund from behind using a pair of Persian clubs, targeting his neck and establishing an injury storyline that would justify what was coming. It was a carefully built excuse. If Backlund lost, it wouldn't read as him being outclassed. It would read as a champion overcome by injury, his legacy as an essentially unbeatable competitor left fully intact. On December 26, 1983, at Madison Square Garden, that storyline paid off. Backlund came to the ring with his neck visibly taped, accompanied by his manager Arnold Skarland. From the opening bell, the match told its story clearly. Every time Backlund attempted an offensive move, he visibly favored the injured neck, and the Sheik targeted that weakness relentlessly. True to form, Backlund refused to stay down, absorbing punishment and continuing to fight back despite the mounting damage. The finish came when the Iron Sheik locked in his signature camel clutch. And with Backlund's neck already compromised by the storyline injury, the hold looked genuinely devastating. The referee repeatedly asked if he wanted to submit. By every account of the moment, Backlund refused to answer anything other than no. That's when Arnold Skarland made the decision that would define the entire angle. Watching from the corner, and reportedly concerned about a career-threatening injury if the match continued, Skarland grabbed a white towel and threw it into the ring. The referee saw it, called for the bell, and just like that, Backlund's nearly 6-year reign was over without a pinfall, without a submission, decided entirely by someone standing outside the ropes. The genius of that finish, in hindsight, is hard to overstate. Backlund lost the championship, but he never actually lost. He could always say accurately that he never quit. His manager had made that sacrifice for him. It preserved Backlund's legacy as an unbeatable competitor, while still clearing the path the company needed cleared. The Iron Sheik's title reign was never intended to last. Less than a month later, on January 23, 1984, back at Madison Square Garden, he defended the championship against Hulk Hogan, who was positioned as filling in for an injured Backlund. It wasn't really presented as a normal title defense, it was a coronation. Hogan's music hit, the crowd reaction was enormous, and after a short, explosive match that briefly saw the Sheik lock in that same camel clutch, Hogan powered out and finished him off, becoming WWF Champion and setting Hulkamania fully in motion. For Backlund, the aftermath was quieter and considerably less celebrated. Because he'd refused to become a villain, he had no real path into a program against the new top star. Over the following months, he was gradually moved down the card, wrestling his final match for the company on August 4, 1984, before disappearing from WWF television entirely for 8 years. Looking back, that towel thrown on December 26, 1983, wasn't just a finish to one match. It marked the end of an entire philosophy about what wrestling was supposed to be, one built primarily around athletic credibility and the beginning of the sports entertainment era that Hogan would come to define, built instead around larger-than-life characters and mainstream crossover appeal. Backlund did eventually return to WWF in the 1990s, reinvented as an unhinged, intense character, a heel turn he'd once refused to make, finally arriving nearly a decade later in a very different wrestling landscape. He even picked up a brief three-day championship reign in 1994, which ended in a lopsided loss to Diesel that lasted only a matter of seconds. The story of that towel remains one of the more quietly ruthless business decisions in wrestling history. Not a dramatic finish, not a shocking betrayal in the ring, but a calculated call made from outside the ropes that decided the future of an entire company. It's a reminder that some of the most consequential moments in wrestling history don't come from a big move or a shocking turn on camera. They come from a decision made just off-screen by someone the cameras barely noticed at the time. So, was Vince McMahon's decision the right call for wrestling's future? Or was it the ultimate betrayal of the man who built the company's foundation in the first place? Let me know what you think in the comments.